Elvis Presley, the name hits different. He wasn't just a singer. He was a force, a phenomenon. He sold over 1 billion records. He had number one hits in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. No one else did that. He changed music forever. He changed how people dressed, how they moved, what they thought was cool. He was the king. But he died at 42. He died in his home, Graceland, with prescription drugs in his system. He was surrounded by people, but many say he was terribly alone. How does a person become that powerful, that adored, and yet end up so tragically? What goes on inside someone's head when the world worships them? Can we look at Elvis's life, all the highs and the crushing lows, and see the big ideas of psychology playing out? We can. His story isn't just entertainment. It's a living case study. It shows us how our past shapes us, how fame can warp us, how we cope with stress, and how even the strongest people can struggle. We can learn a lot about ourselves, about human nature, by looking at the man behind the myth. Your number 15 does a search for meaning. Ever really end, even for a king? Elvis Presley had it all. Money, fame, women, adoration. More than anyone could dream of. But still, he seemed to search for something more. This is what psychologists call existential angst, or the search for meaning in life. It's that deep human need to feel like our existence matters beyond just daily tasks or pleasures. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote extensively about this. His book, Man's Search for Meaning, talks about how even in extreme suffering, finding purpose can help people survive. I mean, for Elvis, his suffering wasn't external in the same way, but internal. He read a lot of spiritual books. He studied different religions, from Christianity to numerology to the occult. He had a library full of these books at Graceland. He talked for hours about God, the universe, life, death. His stepbrother, David Stanley, described Elvis's intense interest in spiritual topics, sometimes staying up all night discussing theology. He even gave out books on spiritualism to his friends and entourage, the Memphis Mafia. He went through phases, believing deeply in certain ideas for a time, then moving on to others. He often felt a calling, a sense of destiny, even early in his career. He would tell friends he wasn't just put on earth to sing rock and roll. He felt he had a higher purpose, maybe even a spiritual mission. This search for meaning became more intense as his career went on, especially after his mother's death and his divorce from Priscilla. He had achieved everything the world said was important: success, wealth, but these things didn't fill the void. Psychologist Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, places self-actualization, which involves finding meaning and purpose, at the very top. Elvis had met all his basic needs. He had love, belonging, esteem, but that final level, the one about fulfilling one's true potential and finding meaning, seemed to elude him in a stable way. He would often get frustrated, he would sometimes feel empty, he felt the weight of his fame, it made him question things, he wondered if his life was just about entertaining people. He needed something more profound. He once told a friend, Larry Geller, his hairdresser and spiritual confidante, there has to be more to life than this. This was a man who had everything but still felt that deep human yearning. This search wasn't just a casual hobby for him. It was a serious, sometimes desperate quest. He wasn't just looking for answers, he was looking for peace. He wanted to understand why he was here. He wanted to know what his real mission was, and he hoped it was bigger than rock and roll. But did he ever find it? Did the constant search itself become a distraction? Or was the answer always right in front of him, just too simple for a king to see? Did his very fame make it impossible for him to truly connect with a deeper purpose, always pulled back by the demands of his persona? What if the meaning he sought could not be found in books, but in living a different kind of life? Number 14, can the pressure of being the king ever be managed? Elvis Presley was under constant, unimaginable pressure. From his first hit in 1956, Heartbreak Hotel, until his death in 1977, he was always Elvis. He was always expected to be magnificent. This kind of chronic stress can lead to burnout. Your burnout isn't just feeling tired. It's a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged or excessive stress. Psychologists Herbert Freudenberger and Christina Maslach were pioneers in defining this condition. They identified symptoms like cynicism, detachment, and a reduced sense of accomplishment. Think about Elvis's schedule. He performed relentlessly. He made 31 movies in the 1960s, often churning them out back to back. He had to be on all the time. He had to look a certain way, act a certain way. People expected him to be the wild, hip-swinging rebel, then the family-friendly movie star, then the Vegas showman. This constant demand for performance, combined with little real downtime, wore him down. In the early 70s, during his Vegas residency and extensive tours, the signs of burnout were clear. He was exhausted, he gained weight. His performances, while still often brilliant, became more erratic. He was frequently sick. He relied heavily on prescription drugs just to get through the day and sleep at night. Dr. George Nicopolis, his personal physician, prescribed him thousands of doses of various medications over the years. These drugs, meant to help him cope, ultimately trapped him. He needed stimulants to perform, sedatives to sleep. It was a vicious cycle driven by the demands of his career. He often complained of feeling tired. He sometimes lashed out, he became more withdrawn backstage, he wasn't the vibrant, joyful young man anymore. The expectations never stopped. Every concert, every appearance, every song had to be perfect. He was the king, the audience expected it, Colonel Parker expected it, Elvis himself expected it. This immense burden crushed him. The joy of performing, which was so evident in his early days, seemed to fade, replaced by a sense of obligation. He was trapped by his own success. The thrill was gone, replaced by the grind. The pressure wasn't just from work. It was also from maintaining the image. Every public appearance was scrutinized. Every private moment was speculated about. He lived in a fishbowl. This lack of privacy, combined with the endless work, fueled his burnout. He felt isolated, even surrounded by his entourage. No one truly understood the burden he carried. But was there any way he could have stepped back without losing everything? Did the people around him truly understand the toll it was taking? Or did everyone, including Elvis, believe the show had to go on no matter the personal cost? Could someone truly iconic ever find a way to escape the golden cage of their own making? Number 13. How do we learn who we are through others? Before Elvis became Elvis, he was a boy who watched and listened. This is called observational learning or social learning theory, a concept largely developed by psychologist Albert Bandura. It means we learn by watching others. We see what they do, we see the consequences, and we decide if we want to imitate it. For Elvis, this was crucial to his musical development. He grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later Memphis, Tennessee, surrounded by a rich mix of musical styles. He didn't just listen to one type of music, he absorbed everything. He listened to country music on the Grand Ole Opry radio show. He went to gospel tent revivals where he heard powerful, emotive singing. He spent time on Beale Street in Memphis, listening to blues musicians like B.B. King. He listened to rhythm and blues, to gospel quartets, to pop crooners. He was a sponge. He didn't just passively listen, he studied, he learned the movements of gospel singers. He learned the guitar riffs of bluesmen, he learned the vocal phrasing of country stars. He saw how performers connected with an audience. He watched how they moved their bodies, how they commanded attention. He saw the joy, the passion, the raw energy. He practiced. He would stand in front of a mirror, trying out different poses, different expressions. He would sing along to songs, mimicking the artists he admired. He found his own voice, his own style, by first learning from others. He blended these influences into something completely new. When he first started performing, he wasn't yet the king. He was a nervous young man trying to find his way, but he had these powerful internal models. He had seen how gospel singers could mesmerize a crowd. He had felt the raw energy of the blues. He took these observations and made them his own. His famous hip gyrations, for instance, were partly inspired by the movements of black gospel singers and blues performers he had observed. He internalized these observations, processed them, and then externalized them in a way that was uniquely Elvis. His early recordings, like That's All Right in 1954, show this fusion. He didn't invent these styles, but he combined them and presented them to a wider, primarily white audience in a way that had never been done before. He was a product of his environment, a testament to the power of observation. But if he learned so much from observing others, did he also internalize lessons about fame and its pitfalls? Did he observe any negative consequences in the lives of the artists he admired? And if so, Why did he not avoid similar traps later in his own life? Can we ever truly separate what we learn from what we become? Number 12 is our destiny fixed, or do we create it? From a young age, Elvis Presley had an unshakable belief that he was special. He felt destined for greatness. This idea that a belief can influence outcomes touches on the concept of self-fulfilling prophecy. This is when a person's expectation, positive or negative, about a situation or event affects their behavior in a way that makes that expectation more likely to happen. Sociologist Robert K. Merton described this phenomenon. If you believe something strongly enough, you might act in ways that make it true. Elvis told his friends and family early on that he was going to be rich and famous. He told his mother Gladys that he would buy her a big house. He spoke about it with a conviction that struck those around him. He wasn't just dreaming. He seemed to truly believe it. This belief fueled his ambition. It pushed him to keep trying, even when faced with rejection. Many early record labels turned him down. Sun Records' Sam Phillips initially wasn't sure what to do with him, but Elvis persevered. His belief wasn't just about passive wishing. It drove his actions. He practiced his guitar tirelessly. He sought out opportunities to sing. He knew he had something unique, even if others didn't see it yet. This kind of persistent self-belief is a powerful motivator. It gave him the confidence to perform with an uninhibited style that was shocking for the 1950s. He performed with a swagger and a certainty that few newcomers possess. He exuded charisma because he believed in himself. This confidence then resonated with audiences, making them believe in him too. His internal conviction seemed to pull external circumstances towards him. When he walked into Sun Records, he wasn't just a hopeful kid. He was a kid who knew he had a destiny to fulfill. This wasn't some mystical force. It was the psychological power of his own mind shaping his efforts, his resilience, and his interactions with the world. He was, in a way, manifesting his own future through sheer force of will and a deep-seated inner conviction. He saw himself as chosen. He saw himself as unique, and that vision empowered him to become just that. But was this belief in destiny a source of strength, or did it also become a burden? Did it prevent him from ever truly resting, always feeling the need to fulfill some grand, preordained role? And if he created his own destiny, did he also unknowingly create the path to his own downfall? When does self-belief become a blind spot? Number 11. When does love become a form of control? Elvis's relationship with his mother Gladys was intense. It's a classic example for discussing attachment theory, a psychological model developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth. It describes the long-term emotional bonds between people, especially between children and their primary caregivers. Elvis and Gladys had what many would describe as an anxious, preoccupied attachment style. This often results from inconsistent parenting, leading the child to constantly seek closeness but also fear rejection or abandonment. Gladys lost a twin son at birth, Elvis's brother, Jesse Garon. This tragedy likely intensified her bond with Elvis, her surviving son. She was fiercely protective, almost possessive of him. She called him my life's desire. As Elvis, in turn, adored her, he often said she was the most important person in his life. He bought her cars, jewelry, and ultimately Graceland, so she would never have to work again. He slept in the same bed as his parents until he was a teenager. This close, almost enmeshed, relationship was unusual, even for the time. When Elvis became famous, Gladys struggled. She couldn't handle the attention, the crowds, the loss of her private life. She often drank to cope. Her health declined rapidly. Elvis was devastated by her suffering. He tried everything to make her happy, but her world had been turned upside down by his success. This created a tragic irony. His love for her drove him to success, but that success made her miserable. Gladys died in August 1958 while Elvis was in the army. He was inconsolable. His grief was profound and public. He cried openly at her funeral, shouting, "My whole life's gone." Biographers like Peter Guralnick in Last Train to Memphis detail his raw, visceral pain. He never fully recovered from her death. Psychologists often, point to this as a pivotal moment in his life. He lost his emotional anchor. He lost the one person he felt truly understood him and loved him unconditionally. After her death, he struggled with a deep sense of loneliness and emptiness. He sought to fill that void, often unsuccessfully. He looked for mother figures in other women. He created an entourage, the Memphis Mafia, around him, creating a protective bubble that mimicked the safety he felt with his mother. But nothing could truly replace her. The intense bond, while loving, perhaps also limited his ability to form other healthy, independent relationships. He seemed to perpetually search for that unique connection he had with his mother. But did her overwhelming love, however well-intentioned, hinder his emotional development in some ways? Could his difficulty in forming stable relationships later in life be a direct consequence of this intense, all-consuming early bond? What are the true costs of such an all-encompassing love? Number 10, why do people go along with bad decisions? Elvis Presley surrounded himself with an entourage, the Memphis Mafia. They were his friends, his cousins, his bodyguards. They traveled with him, lived with him, and were fiercely loyal. But this close-knit group also created an environment ripe for groupthink. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon where a group of people makes irrational or dysfunctional decisions because they prioritize harmony and conformity over critical evaluation. Psychologist Irving Yanis first developed this theory. The Memphis Mafia members rarely challenged Elvis. They're dependent on him for their livelihood and their lifestyle. They reinforced his ideas, good or bad. If Elvis wanted to buy something extravagant, they cheered him on. If he wanted to isolate himself, they helped him do it. If he wanted more pills, they often facilitated it, seeing it as part of serving the king. This wasn't necessarily malicious intent. It was often a desire to please him, to maintain their place in his inner circle, and to avoid conflict. This meant Elvis often lacked critical feedback. No one was truly holding him accountable. When his health began to decline rapidly in the mid-1970s, many in his inner circle saw it. They saw the increasing drug use, the weight gain, the erratic behavior, but few spoke up effectively. Those who did try to challenge him, like Red and Sonny West or Dave Hebler, were eventually fired, as detailed in their controversial book, Elvis: What Happened. This reinforced the idea that challenging the king was not tolerated. The group was homogeneous. They all shared the same experiences, goals to serve Elvis, and often the same perspective. This lack of diversity in thought made them more susceptible to groupthink. They insulated Elvis from the outside world. They created a bubble where his reality was the only reality. This made it very hard for him to see his own problems objectively. He was surrounded by yes men. Disloyalty, while comforting for Elvis, ultimately contributed to his isolation and decline. The group dynamic made it difficult for anyone to intervene constructively in his drug problem or his increasingly unhealthy lifestyle. They were caught in the web of his fame and their own dependency. They wanted to protect him, but their collective silence or acquiescence inadvertently harmed him. But if their loyalty was truly meant to protect him, why did it fail so spectacularly? Was it an unconscious fear of losing their privileged positions that silenced them? And what does it say about human nature that even deep affection can lead to such detrimental collective inaction? Number 9, why do we stay in situations that hurt us? Elvis Presley, especially in his later years, often expressed frustration with his career and with Colonel Tom Parker, his manager. He felt trapped. This feeling aligns with the concept of learned helplessness, developed by psychologist Martin Seligman. It's when an individual has learned to behave helplessly in a particular situation, even when they have the power to change it. They've experienced repeated adverse events that they couldn't control, and eventually they stop trying. Colonel Parker was a shrewd, controlling manager. He had a 50% commission, an unusually high percentage. He also made decisions without Elvis's full input. For example, he kept Elvis from performing internationally, possibly due to Parker's own undocumented immigrant status. He pushed Elvis into mediocre movies throughout the 1960s, despite Elvis's desire for more serious acting roles. Elvis felt his career was being dictated to him. Elvis signed a contract with RCA in 1973 that gave Colonel Parker even more control, especially over publishing rights. Elvis was reportedly upset about this deal, feeling he was giving too much away. But he signed it. Why? By this point, Elvis had been working under Parker's management for nearly 2 decades. He had achieved unparalleled success under Parker. He had learned that Parker knew best, or at least that challenging Parker was difficult and often fruitless. His attempts to break free, or even just influence his career more, often met with resistance from Parker. Over time, Elvis might have internalized the belief that he couldn't change the situation, or he just had to live with it. This passive acceptance, even when he grumbled and complained, is a hallmark of learned helplessness. He felt powerless. He would often say, "The colonel owns me." This wasn't entirely true legally, but it was true psychologically, as he believed it. This sense of being trapped fueled his depression and his reliance on drugs. If you feel like you can't control your life, even parts that are deeply unhappy, you might turn to other ways to cope, however unhealthy. He was a king, but he felt like a pawn in his own empire. He continued touring and performing, often when he was unwell because he felt obligated because it was what the colonel wanted. He lost the sense of agency over his own life and career, but if Elvis was truly the king, why couldn't he fire his manager? Was it more than just learned helplessness and perhaps a fear of the unknown, of navigating the music industry without Parker's familiar, albeit restrictive, presence? And do we too often cling to the familiar, even when it's detrimental, simply because the effort to change feels too overwhelming? Number 8. How do we reconcile our true selves with our public masks? Elvis Presley was a rebel. He was the king of rock and roll. His music and movements challenged social norms in the 1950s. He embodied youth rebellion. Then, in 1958, he was drafted into the U.S. Army. He served 2 years, mostly in Germany. This created a fascinating psychological conflict illustrating cognitive dissonance. This theory, proposed by Leon Festinger, states that when a person holds conflicting beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors, it creates psychological discomfort dissonance. People are then motivated to reduce this dissonance, often by changing one of their beliefs or behaviors, or by finding justifications. Elvis went from being a scandalous rock star, shaking his hips on stage, to being Private Presley, getting a regulation haircut, and following orders. This was a stark contrast. The public expected him to either resist or to fade away. But he embraced his service. He said, "The army can do what it wants with me." He didn't complain. He wore his uniform with pride. He was a model soldier. This behavior was in direct conflict with his rebellious image. How did he reduce this dissonance? He didn't abandon his rock star identity. Instead, he integrated it. He saw his military service as part of his duty, something noble. He publicly stated he didn't want special treatment. This helped reconcile the two conflicting images, the rebel and the patriot. He showed he could be both. He demonstrated that his rebellious spirit wasn't anti-American, just anti-stifling conformity. This strategic move was actually quite brilliant, whether conscious or unconscious. It broadened his appeal. It reassured conservative parents who feared rock and roll. It showed he was a good boy underneath the controversy. It allowed him to maintain his core identity as a performer while also fulfilling a societal expectation. He didn't just go through the motions. He embraced the experience, at least publicly. He grieved his mother's death while in Germany. He learned to drive a Jeep. He found a new kind of routine. The army experience also gave him a break from the relentless pace of stardom. It was a chance to reset, though he probably didn't see it that way at the time. He came back a more mature, slightly different Elvis, ready for the next phase of his career. He reconciled the rebel with the responsible citizen, which helped maintain his image and career longevity. But did this reconciliation truly resolve the inner conflict, or just push it deeper? Did he ever fully recover his rebellious edge after conforming to the military's demands? And how much of our true self do we sacrifice when we try to make conflicting parts of our lives fit together neatly for public consumption? Number 7. How do we cope when the worst happens? Elvis Presley's reliance on prescription drugs is a tragic but powerful case study in maladaptive coping mechanisms. Coping mechanisms are the strategies people use to deal with stress, trauma, or emotional pain. When these strategies are unhealthy or ultimately harmful, they are called maladaptive. Elvis's drug use falls squarely into this category. His mother Gladys died in 1958. This was the single most traumatic event of his life. He was inconsolable. Biographers like Elaine Dundee and Elvis and Gladys highlight how central his mother was to his identity and emotional stability. After her death, he struggled deeply with grief. He reportedly started using sedatives to sleep shortly after. This was a direct response to immense emotional pain. As his fame grew, so did the demands on him. The relentless touring, the pressure of performance, the constant scrutiny, the isolation that came with superstardom, all of these created chronic stress. He used stimulants to stay awake and perform, and sedatives to calm down and sleep. This became a cycle. His physician, Dr. George Nikopoulos, acknowledged prescribing him many different medications, including amphetamines, barbiturates, and narcotics, over many years. And Dr. Nick, as he was known, claimed he was trying to help Elvis manage his pain and insomnia, and that he was weaning him off drugs, but the sheer volume of prescriptions tells another story. This wasn't just about managing physical pain, it was about managing emotional pain. He used the drugs to numb his feelings, to escape the pressures, to cope with loneliness, to manage anxiety. He was self-medicating for depression and insomnia that were likely exacerbated by his lifestyle. Maladaptive coping mechanisms often provide immediate relief, but they create larger problems in the long run. For Elvis, it led to addiction, severe health issues, and ultimately, his death. His entourage often enabled him, sometimes out of misguided loyalty, sometimes out of fear. They saw the pills as necessary for him to perform. This created a system where his drug use was sustained, not challenged. He was trapped in a cycle of dependency. He tried to stop at times. He would check into hospitals, but the underlying emotional pain and the pressures of his life were never fully addressed in a healthy way. So he always returned to the drugs. But did anyone around him truly understand the depth of his emotional suffering, or did they only see the symptoms? Could he have found healthier coping mechanisms if he had been allowed a more normal life, free from the constant spotlight? And how much responsibility do those who provide or enable the maladaptive coping bear when the consequences become fatal? Number 6, does fame itself create narcissism? With Elvis Presley's life, especially his later years, shows traits often associated with narcissistic personality disorder (NPD), though it's important to remember a posthumous diagnosis is speculative. However, his behavior offers a stark illustration of many narcissistic tendencies. Narcissism, as defined by figures like Otto Kernberg and Heinz Kohut, involves an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others. From an early age, Elvis was adored, first by his mother, then by the world. This constant adulation can feed an already fragile ego or create one. He was literally called the King. Imagine being told every day, by millions, that you are perfect, beautiful, amazing. It's difficult not to internalize that to some degree. He surrounded himself with an entourage, the Memphis Mafia, who catered to his every whim. They were there to serve him, to affirm him, to protect him from anything that might challenge his worldview. He rarely heard no. He had a grandiose sense of self. He believed he had special insight into spiritual matters. He saw himself as a chosen individual. He engaged in extravagant spending, buying cars, homes, and gifts for his entourage and strangers alike. This wasn't just generosity, it was also a way to maintain their loyalty and his image as a benevolent, all-powerful figure. This is often called love bombing or maintaining a flying monkey type of support system in the context of narcissistic behaviors. His relationships were often tumultuous. He struggled with intimacy and commitment, perhaps because no one could ever fully meet the endless need for admiration. His divorce from Priscilla, as detailed in her book Elvis and Me, highlights his control, his jealousies, and his difficulty with emotional give and take. He expected constant devotion. He was often impatient and demanding. He could lash out when he felt disrespected or challenged. The isolation of fame likely exacerbated these traits. He lived in a bubble, disconnected from normal life. He couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed. This meant his only interaction was often with people who served him. He lost the ability to navigate ordinary social interactions, which require empathy and reciprocity. The world revolved around him, and eventually he came to expect it always would. But was his narcissism a core part of his personality or a protective shell built to cope with overwhelming fame? Could any human being maintain humility under such constant, intense adoration? And what happens to the human psyche when the line between self-worth and self-worship becomes irrevocably blurred? Number 5, how do we build and maintain who we are? Elvis Presley's creation of his iconic persona is a powerful example of identity formation and ego development. Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development describe how individuals build their sense of self through various crises. Adolescence, with its identity versus role confusion stage, is crucial. Elvis was a young man when he exploded onto the scene. He had to figure out who Elvis was, not just Vernon and Gladys' son. In his early career, Elvis didn't just sing. He performed. He created a stage presence that was revolutionary. His curled lip, his swagger, his gyrating hips, these weren't just random movements anymore. They were carefully crafted elements of a persona that became instantly recognizable. He fused the sensuality of blues and gospel with a country boy innocence. He was a paradox, and that was part of his appeal. He learned how to project confidence in danger, even if he was shy off stage. This was the ego at work, mediating between his inner self and the demands of the external world. He developed a strong, distinctive style in his clothing as well. From his flashy suits to his perfectly coiffed hair, every detail contributed to the Elvis brand. This self-presentation was a deliberate act of identity construction. He knew he was different, and he leaned into it. He wasn't afraid to shock. He used his looks, his voice, his charisma to build this formidable public identity. But as with many public figures, the persona eventually started to overshadow the person. The demands of being Elvis became immense. In his later years, especially during his Vegas residencies, the character became larger than life. He wore elaborate jumpsuits, often weighing hundreds of pounds, covered in rhinestones. He was almost a caricature of his former self. The performance was everything. He was always on, even when he was unwell. This raises questions about authenticity. How much of the original Elvis remained inside the elaborate costume? Did the persona become a cage? He had successfully formed an identity that captivated the world, but it also became a heavy burden. He struggled to reconcile the private man with his insecurities and spiritual quests with the public king who had to be perfect and infallible. The constant pressure to live up to the myth he created was immense. But if he created this iconic identity, did he truly own it, or did it eventually own him? Can a public persona ever be fully separated from the private self without causing deep psychological conflict? And what happens when the world demands the mask, but the person underneath is crumbling? Number 4, why do we hold on so tight? Elvis Presley's deep, almost debilitating grief over his mother's death is a profound example of complicated grief. Most people grieve in a way that eventually lessens in intensity, allowing them to move forward. However, complicated grief, sometimes called persistent complex bereavement disorder, is a severe and long-lasting form of grief that interferes with daily functioning. Researchers like M. Catherine Shear have extensively studied this condition, noting symptoms like intense yearning, preoccupation with the deceased, and difficulty accepting the loss even years later. Gladys Presley died on August 14, 1958, while Elvis was serving in the army in Germany. He was given emergency leave to attend her funeral. His reaction was extreme. The witnesses described him as inconsolable, crying uncontrollably, and repeatedly calling her name. He said, "My whole life's gone." This wasn't just typical sorrow. It was a profound foundational loss that he never fully processed. His mother was his world, his confidante, his emotional anchor. He had promised her he would always take care of her, and her death felt like a failure on his part. For years after her death, he would visit her grave almost daily when he was at Graceland. He kept her belongings. He often spoke of her. He never really came to terms with her absence. He sought to replace the void she left. He looked for a woman who could be like his mother, someone to care for him unconditionally. Priscilla, in her book, describes how Elvis tried to mold her into a version of Gladys, even dressing her like his mother. This is a common, though unhealthy, coping mechanism in complicated grief, trying to recreate the lost relationship. This unresolved grief contributed significantly to his later struggles. It made him feel lonely. It made him seek comfort in unhealthy ways, including his reliance on prescription drugs. The drugs numbed the emotional pain that he couldn't face. He often talked about his desire to be reunited with his mother in the afterlife. This longing was always present, a constant ache beneath the surface of his glamorous life. His ability to compartmentalize and perform still amazed people. He could sing with incredible passion, even as this deep sorrow remained inside him. But the sorrow was always there. It shaped his choices, his relationships, and ultimately his health. He carried the weight of her loss every day of his life after 1958. It was a wound that never truly healed. But why did this specific loss cling to him so tightly, unlike others? Was it the nature of their bond or the circumstances of his fame that prevented him from healing? And what lessons does Elvis's unending grief teach us about the very limits of human resilience in the face of irreplaceable loss? Number 3, why do we fail to act when someone needs help? Elvis Presley's final decline and eventual death on August 16, 1977, present a stark, tragic example of the bystander effect. This psychological phenomenon, studied by social psychologists Bibb Latané and John Darley, explains why individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present. The greater the number of bystanders, the less likely anyone is to intervene. This happens due to diffusion of responsibility. Each person assumes someone else will act, and pluralistic ignorance. Everyone looks to others to see how to react, and if no one acts, everyone concludes no action is needed. Elvis was surrounded by an entourage, the Memphis Mafia. They were with him constantly. They saw his health deteriorating, they witnessed his escalating drug use, his mood swings, his increasing isolation, his physical ailments, his erratic behavior. They knew he was unwell, yet for many years effective intervention did not happen. Why? There was a clear diffusion of responsibility. Everyone likely thought someone else will talk to him, or the doctor is handling it, or Colonel Parker will deal with it. No single person felt solely responsible. They were also economically dependent on Elvis. To challenge him directly risked their livelihood, as demonstrated by the firing of Red and Sonny West and Dave Hebler after they published their book critical of Elvis. This fear of consequence contributed to their inaction. Pluralistic ignorance also played a role. If everyone else was quiet or just facilitating his requests, it would have been hard for one person to break ranks and say, "This is wrong." They might have assumed that since no one else was causing a scene, perhaps the situation wasn't as dire as it seemed, or that others knew something they didn't. They became accustomed to his behavior, normalizing what was clearly abnormal and dangerous. Dr. George Nicopolis, his personal physician, was prescribing him vast amounts of medication. While Dr. Nick later argued he was trying to manage Elvis's addiction, the sheer quantity of drugs suggests a failure to intervene effectively. Even the doctor, a professional, seemed caught in the web, perhaps feeling immense pressure from Elvis and his circle. The system around Elvis was designed to keep him comfortable, not necessarily healthy. His wishes were paramount. Ultimately, Elvis died from a heart attack with a cocktail of prescription drugs in his system. The people around him loved him, were loyal to him, but their collective inaction, influenced by the bystander effect and the unique pressures of celebrity, meant that the king was allowed to slowly destroy himself despite being constantly surrounded. But what would have truly happened if one person had stepped up, bravely and consistently, to force a change? Would Elvis have listened, or would he have simply pushed them away too? And what does this reveal about the difficult, often impossible, choices faced by those who love and depend on someone self-destructing, especially when that person is incredibly powerful? Number 2, are we born who we are, or do we become it? Elvis Presley's life offers a fascinating lens to examine the nature versus nurture debate. This fundamental psychological question asks how much of our personality, intelligence, and behavior is determined by our genetics nature versus our environment and experiences nurture. With Elvis, we see a powerful interplay of both. On the nature side, Elvis clearly possessed innate talent. His distinctive voice, his natural charisma, his musical ear, and his physical attractiveness were all partly genetic gifts. He came from humble beginnings, but his extraordinary talent set him apart from his twin brother, Jesse Garon, who died at birth. Even as a child, he showed an early aptitude for music, singing in church. This raw, inherent ability was undeniable. It was the spark that ignited his career. He had a natural stage presence that couldn't be taught. But nurture played an equally crucial role. He grew up immersed in the rich musical landscape of the American South gospel, blues, country. This environment provided the raw material, the influences that shaped his musical style. He listened to Rosetta Tharpe Arthur, Crudup, Jimmy Rogers, and many others. His upbringing in a poverty-stricken family in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later Memphis, Tennessee, instilled in him a deep desire to succeed and provide for his family. This grit and determination were forged by his circumstances. His intensely close relationship with his mother, Gladys, provided a crucial emotional foundation, but also, perhaps, fostered some dependency issues. His father, Vernon, was less demonstrative but hardworking. These early family dynamics were part of his nurture. The era he grew up in, the conservative 1950s, also played a part. His rebellious style was a direct reaction to the restrictive social norms of the time. The very controversy he generated propelled him to greater fame. As he became famous, his environment completely changed. He was surrounded by wealth, adoration, and an entourage. This environment, while seemingly ideal, also nurtured isolation, entitlement, and ultimately contributed to his drug dependency. The constant pressure of fame, the lack of privacy, and the influence of Colonel Parker were all powerful environmental factors that shaped his later life and decline. And Elvis was a unique blend of innate talent and deeply formative experiences. His nature gave him the tools, but his nurture shaped how those tools were used, for better or worse. He didn't just inherit greatness, he cultivated it, and then he was shaped by its immense weight. But if his nature provided the raw talent, could a different nurturing environment have steered him away from his tragic end? How much agency do we truly have over our lives when both our innate predispositions and our life experiences push and pull us in different directions? And can we ever truly separate what we are given from what we become? Number one, what makes us do what we do? Elvis Presley's early musical influences and his development of a unique performance style offer a compelling look at observational learning, a concept championed by psychologist Albert Bandura. This theory explains that we learn behaviors by watching others and then imitating them. It's not just about direct rewards or punishments, it's about modeling. Elvis was a master modeler. As a young boy in Tupelo and Memphis, Elvis was exposed to a vast array of music and performance styles. He absorbed everything. He attended Pentecostal revivals where he witnessed the fervent physical and emotional expressions of gospel singers and preachers. He saw how they used their bodies and voices to move a crowd. He listened to rhythm and blues artists on Beale Street like B.B. King, learning the guitar licks and vocal inflections. He listened to country music on the radio, picking up the storytelling and melodic structures. He didn't just passively consume, he actively studied. He would spend hours practicing in front of a mirror, mimicking the poses, the facial expressions, and the hip movements he saw in others. He observed how performers engaged with an audience, how they built excitement, how they held attention. He internalized these observations and then synthesized them into his own groundbreaking style. His famous hip thrusts and leg shakes, which were so controversial in the 1950s, were directly influenced by the movements he saw in black gospel and blues performers. He took what he observed, filtered it through his own personality, and then exaggerated it, making it uniquely Elvis. This process of observational learning was not just about copying, it was about creative recombination. He saw separate pieces of gospel wail, a blues guitar riff, a country ballad sentiment, a preacher's intensity, and put them together in a way no one else had. He was a pioneer, not just because he was original, but because he was a brilliant synthesizer of existing cultural forms, which he learned by watching. This learning was reinforced by feedback. When audiences reacted strongly to his performances, it encouraged him to continue and refine these behaviors. The screaming girls, the shocked adults, the sheer energy he generated, this feedback loop strengthened his belief in his chosen performance style. He learned what worked, not just musically, but emotionally and culturally. He learned how to command a stage, how to be a star, by watching and then doing. But did he also observe the pitfalls of fame in the lives of the artists he admired? And if so, why did he not avoid those same traps later in his own life? Can we ever truly separate the positive lessons we learn from others from the negative patterns we might unknowingly adopt? And what hidden influences beyond the obvious might have shaped the king we thought we knew?